Game over, man. Game over. Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger potion. So serious.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 11th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
And I'm Jay Ledbetter.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Fellas, you ready to scream your heads off?
I don't know if our microphones would love that. I'm just kicking myself that I didn't have a ghost face mask to wear for this. I thought I had one somewhere and I couldn't find it.
I'm trying to think of a meta reference. Hold on. For three white guys on a podcast? How cliche.
I think that works, yeah. If
these men can't jump.
Yeah, I think all of those are very appropriate. Yeah, I'm sure there's many cliches we could come up with.
Yeah,
what this looks like and what it sounds like.
Yeah,
as far as podcasting goes. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the latest Scream film that just hit theaters with you guys. Glad that you're here. Before we get into it, I do want to ask you guys, although if we can keep this a little bit brief, I love you, Ryan McQuaid.
Yeah, Ryan's not
because
here.
the
We'll
last time we offered up a little bit of pretext, it went for 15 hours before we started the review. So as we get into our thoughts on Scream 6, let's talk about the franchise as a whole, where we sit on it. What were our expectations going into this movie? What do you guys think? We'll start with you first, Jay.
Well, I actually had never seen a Scream sequel. I don't know if you've been following me on Letterboxd, but I had never seen a Scream sequel until like 2 weeks ago. So this has been a real education the last few weeks. I'd seen the first Scream. I think it's like really great. And, you know, knew kind of the reputation of the sequels as these increasingly meta almost entries into the franchise. And I gotta say, this is a consistent franchise. They make pretty good movies.
Yep.
Two I think is really, really good. Mm-hmm. 3 is fascinating and flawed and kind of sloppy.
And knows that it is, which is what's kind of interesting about it.
Right. It's one of those, the thing about the Scream movies is it has this built-in excuse of, fair or not, they can just say, oh, yeah, the reason that's bad is because it's commenting on the badness of the other movies.
Oh, well, I mean, that's the thing. Some of these movies, and I feel like Scream 3 in particular, they kind of got good with time by accident. And at least Scream 3, I think, is the most relevant there as far as that specific topic is concerned.
And the Craven films are all really fun. 3 is such a mean movie, which I like about it, even if it is, I think, the lesser of the Craven films. And then 4, I think, was really predictive in the way that it talked about kind of legacy sequels, because it came out significantly later than 3.
Yeah, I think that's the one that's arguably the most ahead of the curve. Not the best, but the one that was probably most ahead of the curve in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. And then 5, or as it's known, Scream, for some reason. That one I was not really a fan of, I gotta say. I think that movie lacked a point of view because early on in the film, it talks about kind of the elevated horror trend that we're seeing, and it does nothing to build upon that idea. Absolutely nothing. And then it kind of just becomes what it kind of becomes is like a stab movie. If you want to go into the meta context of the film.
That is not inappropriate, no. But I think it does make me think, was that the intent of Scream 5, as we'll call it? But
that's the built-in excuse they have. It's weird.
I know.
It's so weird.
It's so weird. It's because that's something JD and I talked about when Scream 5 first came out. We'll reference this, JD, that on episode 466, we did our own Scream retrospective. So maybe we don't have to get too heavily in the weeds on the franchise because our thoughts exist there. And honestly, they really haven't changed for me. I'm not sure if it has for you. But it does make me wonder with Scream 5 being as regressive as it was. It's very like reactionary. It has a lot on its mind that I think are worthy of this franchise, whether it be requels, legacy sequels, or elevated horror, as you already mentioned there, Jay. but it merely mentions them and doesn't do anything with it. It's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel is really what that movie felt like. And I'm still not a fan of Scream 5 for those reasons. But with Scream 6, as we'll talk about in just a little bit, it kind of does make me think, was the intent that it just was a stab movie? That it just was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm completely with you guys. On the whole, I really like this franchise. And like Jay was talking about, where he recently revisited at least the sequels. That was me last year, like heading into the new Scream, where I had only seen the original. I had never seen any of the sequels. I watched them all in a few days leading up to the new
Probably
Scream
the best
movie.
way to do it. Yeah.
And, really liked a lot of the films. The second film is by far my favorite of the sequels, but
I agree.
For the reasons you guys are talking about, Scream 3, messy, but fascinatingly so.
Yeah.
4 has some good things going for it as well. And then I was severely disappointed by last year's entry into the franchise. I think you guys articulated very well why it doesn't work, or why it's the least compelling of the Scream movies. So going into this new one, I was intrigued, like cautiously optimistic, I guess, like, curious where it was going to go with these characters, with these new characters, and what they were going to establish, and what the meta commentary was going to be.
Yeah.
Was really intrigued by it, but was reserved because of what the last film was. So
yeah, and that Scream film from last year didn't really do much to get me as excited for Scream 6, because I didn't particularly love a lot of the new cast in that one. I don't know if it was a performance.
That was my biggest problem with it.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a performance thing or what. So knowing that most of them were coming back, knowing that it was the same writing and directing team of last year's Scream, Radio Silence specifically, that filmmaking duo there, I did have reservations. So I was just hoping for something a little bit more, I guess attentive, if that makes sense. Something that was at least trying to be a little bit progressive and ahead of the curve, which is what these movies always try to do. And some just better than others, but there's always at least some attempt at something, rather than just simply commentating on the existence of something.
Yeah.
And that's what I was hoping to at least see with this one.
Okay. Well, with that laid out on the table, let's go ahead and jump into Scream 6 here, directed by Matt Bettinelli, Olpen, and Tyler Gillette. It stars Melissa Barrera, Jenna Ortega, Jasmine Savoy Brown, Mason Gooding, Dermot Mulroney, Jack Champion, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Scream 6, in this installment, the survivors of the Ghostface killings leave Woodsboro behind and start a fresh chapter in New York City. All right, let's dive further into this. We'll start with you, Jay. What did you think about Scream 6?
I think Scream 6 has many of the same problems that Scream 5 does, but it does all the superficial stuff so much better than Scream 5, I think. One, the leftover cast from 5, they got rid of the bad people, and they kept the good people. And
Fair, yeah.
good strategy on their part. And I'll tell you who I think is way better in this movie is Melissa Barrera, who I thought was just a dull lead in Scream 5, and I think here really embraces kind of the new direction they're taking her character, leaning into some of the darker elements of her past and what is to come of her in the franchise, because I assume this movie will do okay and they'll make a Scream 7. These things cost no money at all.
Yep.
But obviously Jenna Ortega has become a star. They give a nice little, obviously this is a very meta franchise. They give a nice meta reference early in the film at a Halloween party when somebody dressed up as Wednesday Addams walks right past her.
Yep.
And I will say this, you can judge a Scream movie largely on its opening sequence, because they all start with these phone calls, these really interesting, elaborate death sequences. And I think the one here is very creative. And I think it kind of foretold that this movie was going to be a little more clever than Scream 5, aka Scream. And I still think it lacks a true point of view. I don't really think it has anything to comment on. The thing about the original Scream was it was made by Wes Craven, who was one of the architects of the slasher genre, which was a dead genre by the time Scream came out. So that whole movie and the subsequent films that followed, they were about how lame people thought the slasher genre was by the time that Scream came out.
Yeah.
And I do think it evolved as they went on. Obviously, Scream 2, very explicitly just about sequels and how you have to go bigger and better, and kind of that craze of putting the characters in college I thought was really clever. 3 is just this kind of industry homage, industry takedown, really.
Yeah.
And then 4 was, like we said, ahead of its time.
Yeah.
5 was sort of, in my opinion, regurgitating much of what 4 was saying.
Yep.
And honestly, I think 6 is kind of regurgitating what 5 was saying. I don't think the satirical elements of the film are terribly interesting. But in a vacuum, I would say this is a good horror movie and a pretty bad Scream sequel. That's kind of where I'm at with it. I had a lot of fun with the movie, and it doesn't really live up to the mantle of Wes Craven's franchise.
You know, you mentioned how Scream 6 in some ways almost feels like a regurgitation of some of the things from Scream 5, its direct predecessor, whereas there's a lot about this movie that reminded me of Scream 2. And I don't want to get too much into those weeds because I feel like it might fall into spoiler territory. And this is a film that I don't think we should spoil. I mean, there are things I'd love to talk about with regard to its final act, but I think we should do our best to keep that as vague and spoiler-free as possible for the duration of this conversation. I'll just say this. I think this is a massive improvement over Scream 5. I mean, it almost makes me surprised that it's the same writing and directing team. I'm honestly astounded. It feels like a completely different beast. Now, to your point, Jay, as far as what the film is commenting on and how it functions as a quote-unquote Scream film, it might weirdly be the least insightful of all 6 of them as far as what it chooses to have on its mind. You know, Scream 5 had a lot of things on its mind. I think it just verbalized them very poorly without any insight, but the subject was there. Scream 6 has things on its mind about, I guess, in some ways, cancel culture as it relates to the crime world and how people react to it in the social media day and age, or about the predictability of franchises themselves and how they develop like this cult-like following in some ways. So all of that's there, and it's somewhat interesting. There's actually a more interesting direction this movie does allude to, which we can talk about later, that I think is weirdly fascinating, and it involves Melissa Barrera as the Sam character that I found really provocative. But yeah, I just simply judging it as a movie, as a slasher movie, a horror movie in a vacuum, I think it's way more effective than Scream 5. The performances here from the core 4, as they call themselves, I mean, this is why I feel like it's a different directing team. The performances are so much better when compared to Scream 5. Melissa Barrera is really compelling in this movie. Yeah. And I love the dynamic that she and Jenna Ortega have here. I think the sisterly dynamic is great. So it might not be as insightful as some of the other films in this franchise, but this is the one where I feel like as just a movie-going experience, it's really thrilling. And I think there are some interesting things there for sure.
Yeah, I am completely with you, Brennan, in the sense that I think this film is an incredible improvement on the last film. I think this film is a lot of fun on its own terms as a genre exercise. There are some really great thrills here that I very much enjoyed. As a Scream movie, maybe I'm a little bit higher on it than you guys, or it sounds like I'm at least a little bit higher on it than Jay. Although I do agree that we're at a point where the redundancy of these films, that I don't think will ever dissipate.
It's getting
It'll always
difficult.
be there.
Yeah.
So unless you completely revamp the franchise and you completely just do something new,
unless you're a time traveler. I mean, unless you're a time traveler and you know the trajectory of this stuff, then you know what's going to happen. Otherwise, you just don't know.
Yeah,
you can comment on the Halloween movies. Talk about the Halloween movies, right? Don't be scared to talk about the stuff that's come before you. It's a pretty it doesn't have much venom to it at all, which the other ones do, especially 3, and I would say probably especially 1.
Yeah.
Well, I guess where the film does have a little bit of sting comparatively, at least to the Scream film that came out last year, what I really do appreciate about this film is a couple of things. One, it does include social commentary that is appropriate to the time regarding cancel culture, how easy it is to paint someone in a bad light and really get the worst out of people, how easy it is to manipulate based off of, internet discourse. So it takes that, and then when you meld that with the Scream tropes that all of these films include, what I like about what this film does, the last film I think was 100% a regurgitation of Scream 4.
Yeah, it was.
This, I don't think, is doing that. This is taking a much, it's painting with a little bit of a broader brush. It's not doing the legacy sequel thing. In fact, it's not even commenting on sequels like specifically.
Yeah.
This Scream movie is about franchises. It's about franchise filmmaking and talking about that from a broad perspective, which I did appreciate. And then when you couple that with how
broad.
very broad for sure,
Which,
but that
which
is
is maybe
at least
what
a
this
different
franchise,
approach.
maybe that's what this franchise needs, though. So
Yeah.
that might be a fair point.
I agree. And I think that's where I did find some interest because at least it's not what the last film was doing, which was almost verbatim an echoing of Scream 4. This,
Yeah.
I don't think is doing that. It might be painting broadly, but at least it's doing something differently. And it's talking about commenting on franchises that aren't even in the horror realm, which again offers some, something different and new, which I
Yeah.
did like. And then I also think from a filmmaking perspective, from a storytelling perspective, it's channeling a lot of Scream too, which I am completely with you there, Brendan. So like, as it's acting as a sequel to the reboot that came out last year, if that's how we're going to label it,
Requel.
it takes the best things of Scream 2, as this is acting as the second film in this rebooted version of Scream, and channeling it in a fun way that echoes, what I think is already the best sequel in all of this with Scream 2, and then interjecting these broad strokes about franchises and, the redundancy of that, which I did have fun with. There's one line of dialogue as it relates to everything that we're talking about here from the Mindy character that I think is one of the best lines in all of the franchises.
Is it
To me,
three
was-
simple words? Is that what you're
Yes,
thinking of?
100%. I laughed so hard. To me, that is easily one of the best moments in all of the meta-ness that comes with these films.
Regardless of what you think about these movies, there's always at least one line from every one of them that is utterly brilliant. And that one is certainly, I guess, the most nominal contention here for this movie.
And kind of gets to the heart of even what we're talking about here, and that, look, we've covered all of this territory, so screw it. We're not going to get it all right.
I think it's kind of lame, I'll be honest. And I don't think it goes I don't think it goes with the rest of the movie. It's again,
I think it's 100% what this film is
how
about.
we're talking about the kind of subversion of much of this film. I think those lines should be really good, but they're not aligned with what the movie is, which is really just an homage to the other movies in a celebratory way.
Yeah, where I'll both agree and disagree
in a
with
franchise filmmaking kind of way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's not Gremlins 2, right?
Well,
Which is
no,
a brilliant subversion and send up of its own predecessor. It's not that.
Where I'll agree and disagree with that regarding that line that we're talking about. I think to JD's point, I think it does fit within the realm of where this movie seemed to be going. And I guess I'm jumping the gun a little bit with one of my biggest problems here. What kind of ruins it for me, and where I could see your point, JD, or Jay specifically, is the killer reveal. I'll simply say that. I think this is the worst killer reveal of the entire franchise. And it's because it's been done in a Scream movie before.
Total regurgitation. Absolute regurgitation. But then is that the point? Is that the point?
See, maybe, but I feel like, to your point, Jay, this movie was also functioning as this commentary on the predictability / unpredictability of franchise filmmaking nowadays. And to then go in that direction, I felt like was sort of a defeating of that purpose, especially where it goes afterwards regarding the Sam Carpenter character. So I think there's a point here where the film is trying to have its cake and eat it too in that regard.
Oh, for sure.
I don't think it succeeds. I think in order to have been more effective there, the kill reveal specifically needed to have been something bold, weird, and exciting, and I don't think it is. It didn't work for me, honestly.
Well, and that to me, everything that both of you are just saying there is exactly why that line from Mindy is all the more potent for me.
Okay.
Because whether you find it all redundant, whether you find the new things of this film, if you find that interesting, the line speaks to it all. And that to me, I just find absolutely hilarious. I think that's a big reason why I laughed, because it's not that what she's saying is this grand epiphany as it relates to franchise filmmaking and what this film is doing in terms of its insight. It really has nothing to do with that. And everything to do with what Jay is saying in terms of how redundant, how we've gotten to a point where we've gotten to the threshold where the only thing we can do is speak to that in these broad terms.
So in many ways, it's basically her saying, here we go again. Like, here we go again is what she's saying.
So
okay, I see your point.
Like, I loved it for the reasons that you guys are talking about, and which is hilarious. But I do think it's really effective in that way. And even the way Mindy is written here, she does speak to a lot of those cliches that the film sort of wants to subvert, and in a way it kind of does, but not really, especially because of how redundant it is. And to me, it feels like the only cathartic way to articulate that is those three words, which I just find hilarious and very meta in a Scream kind of way. Because I agree with you guys. When you get into the tropiness of this film, there's really not much that it's doing that's different. I think, if anything, the tone is quite different than what we've seen.
And the kills are grisly.
This is the closest that I think Scream has come to resembling more of an action film than it does a horror film at times.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I don't disagree with that. There's a lot more set pieces. I thought one of my least favorite parts of 5 was just that I thought the kills were super dull and repetitive.
Yeah.
There was nothing interesting about
the
kills
the
in that
ante
film.
here.
They upped the ante for sure,
time.
but to your point, Jay, there's more attention put into the sense of place with regard to the kills. Now, one thing I do wish this film did a little bit more with was taking advantage of the New York City setting.
They're not in New York City. If you stayed for the credits, they're in Montreal, Canada. So they had to fake it till they make it, which again, that's another one of those things. I hate just coming back to this, but it's like, is that a commentary on the fact that historically all of these slasher films have, Jason Takes Manhattan or whatever, they're in Manhattan for 10 minutes. Is that kind of what they're commenting on? I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe. Well, I bring it up broadly because it's not just the New York City specifically. It's the fact that aside from maybe one or two set pieces, the subway scene in particular, which I think is very effective, and then there's one involving a ladder, I'll simply say. Those two are really good. But aside from those two, you could have still set this in Woodsboro. I mean, it doesn't feel like I don't feel the urban landscape hardly at all here. And I wish that there was more to it than just the fact that it was a different location. But there are many times I thought this could have just been the same location once again.
Like when they're in, I assume at one point they're supposed to be in Central Park, but I was like, that could be a mile from my house. What is that? What's going on here? But it is, that is, I think, that was one of the things I was most excited about. I thought that was a really good selling point is let's totally change locations. Let's go to New York City. And you could even fake it better than they fake it in this movie. And it really just doesn't feel like they're in New York, which is obviously something that you can really take advantage of. And I understand it's expensive to film in New York. I don't know. The Safdies did it for way less money than this Scream movie did. So I don't know. Figure it out. But it does not have that. It does not have that New York energy that I wish it had, except for a couple of sequences that you're talking about there. That subway sequence, especially, I think is very, very effective. Even though surely that was on a set, probably, but still it captures the energy that they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, most of this film takes place inside an apartment or an abandoned theater.
That's the thing. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if you could tell us that these characters are in New York or they're away from Woodsboro. That's really all that matters, I guess. Could the film do more to give us that New York energy? Absolutely. I don't disagree with that, but the way this story is written, I don't know if it matters either.
Maybe
it honestly feels more interior because they set it somewhere else, which is a bummer.
Maybe. Yeah.
Or maybe that was the point. Maybe that was all a subversion tactic.
I don't know. I feel like I'm talking about the Matrix Resurrections, my beloved Matrix Resurrections, which is just like you can chalk everything that people criticize about that film up to, well, that's the point. And you can kind of do that with this movie too.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I think you can. Now, to be fair, there are sequences here that mostly does take place indoors, but a lot of those sequences are pretty effective. You brought up that abandoned movie theater, JD, as one of the primary locations. There are some effective sequences there too, and I think they do get a little bit creative with that, especially in the final act. And while I didn't necessarily love the killer reveal for reasons we already talked about, the way they orchestrate the machinations of it and the things that happen afterwards involving Sam Carpenter, I'll simply say, I think is weirdly interesting and very dark and twisted, and kind of presents this idea of what happens to victims of such crimes over the years. Do they develop this thirst for blood as time rolls around? Like, is that even a psychological possibility? And I thought that was a very daring thought. Maybe they'll address that in Scream 7. I don't know if it's meant to be kind of like a setup of sorts, but playing with that a little bit here, it's kind of a provocative notion. And I kind of like that.
I mean, and especially when you consider legacy and her father and everything that goes
serial
into that
killer
as well.
bloodline.
Yeah.
It certainly toys with that in a provocative way. And I think, honestly, that's where this film thrives for me, because you can certainly nitpick it to death and how redundant it is, given where this franchise has, gone before. But the tonal shifts with this film are very new.
Yeah.
And so it does this fascinating thing of giving the Scream fans what they want in terms of what this franchise does. But tonally, it is this new thing where you have, these sisters and their dynamic, the core four, if you will, really, if you even
I do like the core four, and I was unsure
Yeah.
about them in the first film, or Scream 5 specifically, but I really like them here. I think they've really come into their own as their
I
respective
agree.
characters.
I think they came together, and it makes sense to me, given that this film is talking about franchises and how expendable characters have become inside of franchises. And to me, that's where it is a little subversive, because as Mindy talks about in this film, every character in this franchise has been expendable to one degree or another. Now, most of them anyway. So when you're talking about, franchises and how they've even tapped into that a little bit, that is where this film gets a little subversive, even if it is engaging in, very tropey things, in terms of its dramatic through lines and whatnot. And then tonally, it also swings the pendulum completely to the other side, where this is much more grounded emotionally than we've ever seen with anything in this franchise outside of maybe Dewey and what we saw with him in the last film, especially. And so to see how all of that crystallizes here, because I agree with you, Brendan, the reveal of Ghostface at the end of this film.
Yeah.
It's nothing that we haven't seen before. Is it a little funny? Ha ha. One character was right about all of this all along. I mean, maybe. And this is sort of working within the confines of a rebooted franchise, right? Because the last year's film was technically a reboot. So if we're talking about the second film in a new series of Scream films, maybe it's new in that regard, but
and maybe that's
again,
the point.
I'm stretching here if I'm giving it credit.
Because
but
every single Ghostface killer in these movies have taken inspiration from previous Ghostface killers.
Yeah.
So there is this cult-like mentality that they worship these previous killers, and I feel like that sense of cult-like worshiping is most representative here in this movie. And I do find that at least kind of interesting in trying to find a way to use that as a parallel to these cult-like fandoms for certain franchises. So if there's any meta quality there that I feel like is in relation to movies themselves and sequels and franchises, that's the one that I think is at least, that one has some legs. I wouldn't say it's the most daring idea, but I could see that one at least carrying some topical weight with regard to the evolution of movie making, more so than whatever Scream 5 was saying.
Well, regardless of where that lands for you, to me, it's less about that, because at the end of the day, because I've seen all of these films and I have liked this franchise up until this point, for the most part, outside of last year's film.
Yeah.
Yes, we have seen this before in this franchise. So to me, it wasn't about pulling the rug out from under you and having some sort of sleight of hand.
Yeah.
I wasn't interested in that as much as I was the tonal variances of it. Like, the total change is what brings a refreshing quality to it. The performances certainly ham it up a little bit, so there is some fun there, and it's more action oriented than a lot of them tend to be as well. And so it does feel different, even if it isn't different, if that makes sense.
Well, the one thing I will say about the ending, just to throw my 2 cents in, from the perspective of how it works within the narrative of the film and the themes of the film, over the course of the film, all that they talk about, and to me, it was very clear that they're just talking about Star Wars. I was just like, okay, that you're kind of duplicating the first movie as an homage. You're saying, okay, everybody, let's get back into the swing of things. Force Awakens, Scream 5. We're going to put you back in the mindset of these films, remind you what you loved so much about them. And then in this film, they just keep reiterating the key to the second film is you have to subvert. And then it's almost
even
like
invoke Luke Skywalker's name.
Well,
They do.
Literally.
And if you remember in Scream 5, they make a Ryan Johnson joke, and here they make a Letterboxd joke. So it's,
I mean, I really think that is on the front of their minds as they're making this movie, because
Maybe.
everybody's
then-
made Star Wars,
well,
but
then
the problem
maybe-
was at the end of this film they don't subvert. It's almost like their subversion is subverting subversion.
well, so then
where
the
they're-
lack of subversion becomes the subversion. Then.
Exactly. But I don't think that doesn't align to. I think that I'm gonna draw the line at giving them an out at that point. I'm cutting them off. They can't do that.
I will say,
Jay, that's the point.
I really,
No,
oh my God.
no.
Put that as the sticker for the poster.
Don't
That's the point.
don't flip my Matrix Resurrection or Resurrections review back at me. Don't do that.
I will say, out of all the Scream films now, because of what we're saying, how somehow the lack of subversion at the end weirdly becomes the subversion. It's like the reverse has become the new standard, as Rory Culkin's character says in Scream 4. It makes me want to rewatch Scream 6 the most to see where it goes within this trajectory. It's not my favorite of the sequels. I still prefer 2 and 4, honestly, but I would rank this maybe around 4th place out of the 6, if I'm being honest. But it's the one I think has the most rewatchability in that regard, and it's because there is a tonal difference to it, like you're saying there, JD. And I weirdly like that tonal difference. At times it doesn't even feel like a horror film. Like I said, it feels like an action thriller at times, and I think it's a welcome change of pace, though.
And given the dynamic between our central, our core four, if you will, and especially the sisters and the dynamic at play there, it's interesting how the film channels that gravity, to I guess heighten a lot of that the thrilling nature that you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So again, I don't disagree with anything Jay is saying in terms of how silly and redundant and how uninsightful a lot of this film is, even if it is the point. But totally, there's a lot that is new here. And in terms of franchises, the commentary on franchises, maybe it's Star Wars specifically, I don't know. But I don't think it has to be exclusive to Star Wars. A lot of franchises fall into the same traps that this film is bringing up.
Sure.
That it to me, it's much more beyond, we're beyond just legacy sequels and reboots and requels. It's painting with a broader brush. So it does do some things that's interesting. But I did want to ask you guys, though, because we get that scene, again, channeling Scream 2, if you will, with Mindy, a quarter of the way through this film, halfway through this film, when she is trying to figure out, like she's giving us all of the tropes involved and how this is going to play out. In the moment, without knowing what was about to happen, did you guys sense that, okay, she's spilling the beans here? Like, this is exactly how it's going to play out. Because that's how I felt.
Yeah, kind of, but in a way that I didn't necessarily dislike. It kind of reminded me of probably my favorite moment of Scream 5 is when the killer is revealed by accident in the first third of the movie by Dewey himself. So I mean, I love that about that movie, and I think partially why I like it here in Scream 6 really just comes down to Jasmine Savoy's Brown's performance. I think she is wonderful at just
she's very good.
Evoking the excitement.
She was really good in 5 too.
She was great in 5. I'd say
Yeah.
of the core 4, it was her and Mason Gooding. I like the two of them in Scream 5. Jenna Ortega was great as well, but
I always liked Ortega. Gooding grew on me in this one. I didn't love him in 5.
I thought he was charming and as a lovable Chad in the first one, but I think he's even more charming here. Which I mean, they even comment on the fact that his name is Chad, which I think is really funny. But Melissa Barrera, she's introduced in a therapy session, I'll simply say, and it took me 30 seconds for me to think, she's already way better in this movie than she was in Scream 5. What happened? She's really compelling, and she actually has this dry sense of humor to her that helps sell some of the comedic bits here. That I don't know if that was intentional. It may have just been an accident, but there is a dynamic here that I think really works.
Yeah, it feels like, to me, is the directing duo called Radio Silence? Is that what you said?
Radio Silence. That's what they go by.
Whatever, that's very stupid, but they really get a much better grasp on their lead protagonist, similar to what they did in Ready or Not, which I think is not a totally successful movie, but Samara Weaving is like out of this world in that movie. And I think they get a lot closer to that in this film, where it is a character who is conflicted, but also very charming in ways that, I mean, I watched 5 and I was like, oh my God, it's like they got a bunch of Disney Channel actors to be in this movie. Outside of a few, I was just like, is this what young actors are now? I was just thinking back to the ensembles of 1 and 2 especially, and 4 for sure. And it was just like, every single character is distinguishable and unique and memorable. And in 5, it was just so bland. But I think they really get a much better handle on that in this film, and it really is mostly because of Barrera, who took a step up that I didn't think was possible after 5. I really didn't.
You mentioned Disney Channel actors there, and I guess one that kind of falls into that category, at least looking at her history, is Hayden Panettiere. She was in Scream 4. She returns here. Did we like her in this movie? Like, what do we think about her return here?
I would say she's fine. I didn't.
Okay.
She's not her return to the franchise is not exactly Han Solo coming off the Millennium Falcon in Force Awakens. She's a very minor character.
Yeah,
it didn't totally do it for me.
I have a question regarding Kirby as well.
Okay.
And I don't know this. This is a genuine question. Was she brought back because of the external circumstances around Neve Campbell?
We haven't talked about the Sidney Prescott dilemma in this film, which we need to talk about.
No,
I just wonder, because as they were writing this film, I imagine Sidney was meant to be a part of this originally, but then when all of that went down, they needed to replace that character with something else.
Yeah.
Was that when they brought back Kirby, or was Kirby always supposed to be part of this? I'm kind of curious.
That and I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being what you're talking about there, JD. Now, I loved Hayden Panettiere in Scream 4. I thought she was one of the best things about it. The problem I have with Kirby here is just more the writing and the integration of that character back into this world, because it kind of feels like a last ditch effort for
It
legacy
feels a little
character.
shoehorn. That's
It
why I
kind,
wanted to
it kind of
Yeah, for
does.
sure.
ask that
And
question.
I
Yeah.
don't know if it was, but it
But that's
kind
the
of
point.
Yes, exactly.
you just know the people from Radio Silence will just use that phrase to rebuttal any criticism this movie receives.
Put that on the poster.
Yeah.
That's
Oh my
the
God.
point.
But it does feel like it's trying to overcompensate for someone else's absence.
That's
and I
how it
don't know if
feels,
that's
yeah.
the case. Yeah.
And that's why it's hard to say anything about her performance. She is fine, but
Yeah.
what she's asked to do isn't very much.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to say one way or another. I mean, really, the biggest inclusion we have with her here revolves around spoilers, so it's hard to
Yeah.
really get into. But even that is kind of minuscule. Like it's like she's really just here as filler, is what it feels like to me. But to speak to what you guys were saying about Melissa Barrera, she is really great here. And again, I do wonder if the tonal changes here, like maybe part of it was to fit her sensibilities as an actress. I'm not really too sure,
Maybe.
but she does such a great job of embracing the tropes and the meta qualities of what is Scream, but really doing a great job of evoking that drama and that inner turmoil that Sam is experiencing here as it relates to cancel culture and the unfairness that she is feeling inside of all of that. And she has such a great dynamic with Jenna Ortega as well inside of all of that, that I thought was really great.
I think part of it too, and why she's so good here, is that she has more support around her than she did in Scream 5. In Scream 5, there was a lot that she was sort of hanging on to herself. She had to do pretty much all of the work. But here, you get a lot of equal balance and interplay between her and Jenna Ortega.
Much more of an ensemble.
Yeah, I think the ensemble element here really helps everyone shine, honestly. So it doesn't put too much pressure on anyone to carry any sort of load. And I think that's what helps everyone in that regard too.
Here's a take I just came up with. I think she might also be better in this film because it doesn't ask her to be funny. This is, tell me if you disagree. I think this is far and away the least funny, purposefully. I think that's the point. Okay.
It is.
And I think this is the least comedic Scream film.
But even so, I think there's a lot of irony there, because I said earlier that there are like these deadpan comedic beats at times from Sam that I don't know if that was intentional or not. So it's in a weird way, it's like, yes, I think this movie is less funny, but I think she's also funnier in this one. And maybe that was just sort of maybe that's just more of a byproduct of how dialogue is delivered here, and maybe the way that the tonal variances are meant to support that. I'm not really sure, but I do agree overall this is the least comedic and maybe the least biting of the six, but that's a nice change of pace, honestly. I like that we're going in a different direction there.
And I think any levity that is there with Sam simply comes down to clever editing and writing that offers humor out of a situation that isn't inherently funny, if that makes sense. Because a lot of what Barrera is doing here, like, she isn't doing anything comedically.
No, there are a lot of hard cuts that I think help support any comedic bite, and a lot of it.
That's where
a lot of it, editing to maybe someone's reaction shot, for instance, and that adds a sense of levity that may not have been there either on the script or in the initial performance.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to bring up, though, and sorry, I'm completely changing topics here, but something that just came to mind, because we were talking about how this film doesn't really subvert unless it's subverting by not subverting, and what a sleight of hand that is. One thing, though, that I did find interesting, though, was Cute Boyfriend, because as we lead into the third act, there's an action that is taken by Sam that essentially disregards him from being a part of the third act. That I did find genuinely subversive, because it feels like in any other, not just slasher film, but even a Scream film, he would absolutely be there as someone, like, to be a victim, because we have to have Ghostface killing people in this movie, which means you need bodies. You need bodies for Ghostface to really take control of, and he would have been a victim in a lot of these other movies. And so for Sam to, again, channel that instinct and really the drama that is driving a lot of that character to essentially make sure that he isn't a part of the action there in that final act, I did find interesting. That to me, I thought was genuinely a subversive thing that a lot of these other films wouldn't have done.
And now I'm being talked into this idea that, because I think about the intro, the opening sequence, which I think is really good, and how at the beginning of that sequence, it's like, whoa, this is so subversive. They've never done anything like that before. And then it kind of goes back to the norm on top of the subversion. So maybe it is the point. I don't know. I'm losing my mind over here. And maybe that's the thrust of kind of the themes of this film. I don't know. I thought the opening was really good.
It's subversively predictable, I guess. Is that the way we can put it? I'm trying to think of how we can balance these negatives here.
Although the biggest problem with the introduction is they kill off like the two best actors in the movie right away. But.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
But I will say, to your point there, JD, it's not just the way that it utilizes that cute boyfriend or cute girlfriend trope in Scream movies, but in horror movies in general, because a lot of times that character archetype has more of a crucial play in the narratives of those movies. And here, it's just cute boyfriend to be cute boyfriend. It's really all it is. And I like that. And at the same time, I think what's his name? Josh Segarra, who plays Danny as the cute boyfriend. I think he's also kind of charming. I think he's got a funny sense of humor.
He does the cuteness well.
He does. So he
see, and even that's a subversion on that. Actually, might be a subversion because you do think he's either cannon fodder or the killer, and he ends up being just a guy.
Yeah, he's just a dude.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Maybe this movie's better than I think it is.
Honestly, I am liking it more as we talk about it. I mentioned earlier that of the 6 Scream films, I'd probably rank this around 4th place at this point now.
I would put it 5th.
I think it's a better movie than Scream 3, which is why I put it above it. But I think there's more interesting things on that earlier film's mind that may have only formed by accident. But yeah, the way we're talking about this, I'm liking it. I really enjoyed the theater experience. This one was a riot to see. I'd say as a movie going experience, it's one of the better ones.
And I feel like I've been the most negative on the film, and I haven't really talked about what I most liked about it in the moment of being in the theater. Was just like, it's a good slasher movie. I mean, you think about some of the kills in this film. I think the most notable shot in the trailer is Ghostface with a shotgun, which I think, anytime you can throw in something you've never seen before, this is one of my go-tos whenever I talk about movies, is I've never seen that before. That's a real asset to any movie, I think, and we haven't seen that before in this franchise, and I thought that was really, really effective, and also that kind of bodega feel in that convenience store, that had a little bit of New York energy to it, although the exterior didn't. But it really had that kind of has a sense of place, which I think this film
kind of had a Western feel,
like
a Western feel at times. Like it almost kind of reminded me of like a Sergio Leone kind of grit to it at times, like the way that shots are static and the way like it's really well
genuinely
done.
Tense too.
It is,
yeah, very, yeah. No, I completely agree. That was certainly a highlight for me, just in terms of it, being a slasher, being a thriller. There's a tangibility to that sequence that is really well crafted for sure. I couldn't help but think of, in terms of tensity anyway, because you get that close up of the girls as they're hiding behind the shelf there, which invokes a little bit of that raptor sequence in Jurassic Park.
Yeah,
a little bit. So like I thought of that, but yeah, I mean in terms of like edge of your seat tenseness, that's there. You guys mentioned the subway sequence earlier, which is also really great. The use of shadow and
I have some questions about
is really
subway
good.
sequence, but
Fair enough.
how a certain character ends up being in pretty good shape after the subway sequence, but whatever.
That's the point, Jay. Come on.
I guess
covered
so.
this.
I think I weirdly think these movies are starting to become pretty aware at how indestructible the human body is sometimes.
They are much more afraid, I think, to kill people now than they used to be. Now it is truly like, whoa, that person got stabbed 7 times, and now they're walking to the ambulance.
Yeah. I guess it's just proof that you get stabbed in the torso. It doesn't mean anything.
I guess that's the point. I don't know.
Exactly.
Can we talk about Neve Campbell? Somebody mentioned the offset. Is there some sort of situation that I don't know about? I didn't know. Hopefully she's not like sick or anything. I don't know.
No, it's nothing like that. It came down to money, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And it was really Neve Campbell asking for a certain amount to return, and that she was not being offered. I think that's what the
it was something
the
along
narrative.
those lines.
Yeah.
Well, she's got so many other offers right now.
Yeah. Well,
I don't. I think it just came down to a respect thing, and you know, she's been the lead of these films for forever, and whatever offer was on the table, she felt was disrespectful. So
I'm not going to spoil it by saying this in case people are wondering, but I'll just say throughout the movie and by around the halfway point, I kind of started to think that the whole narrative of what happened behind the scenes as to why Neve Campbell didn't make this movie, I started to think if that was a marketing ploy and she ended up being the killer the whole time or something.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, but it's not what that is.
I will say, despite that, and of course, I would welcome Sydney back into this franchise if she does decide to return. But given how they've written her over the years and where Sydney finds herself, the way she is written off here kind of makes a lot of sense.
It's like why haven't you done that before?
Yeah,
I mean, it is a throwaway line. It is very clearly like contract negotiations didn't go great. So she's it's like when your dog dies and they're like, yeah, he's out in a field somewhere.
It would have been funny if Gail said something along the lines of no amount of money could bring her here or something like that.
That would have been interesting.
That would be fun.
That would have been funny. But given how they've written,
I don't think they
Sydney,
totally want to burn that bridge yet.
I don't think
they do either.
Yeah.
But it would, honestly, given where her life is, it feels more contrived that Sydney wouldn't still be a part of this.
I agree with that, I think.
And also I think, I love Sidney Prescott as a character. I think she really is the beating heart and the legacy of this franchise in many ways. Right. But even her inclusion in Scream 5 felt sort of lifeless. Like that was to me, that was more Dewey's movie of maybe even more awesome. Gale. Yeah, and maybe even more Gale than it was Sydney. And I think that's just more to do with the writing and the way that those characters, those legacy characters specifically, are interwoven into that specific film. But even so, like, she kind of felt like an afterthought even in Scream 5 to me, which is why her absence here. I mean, I love the character, but it didn't really bother me. I wasn't missing her. I was more interested in the core 4 now.
Absolutely. And moving forward, that's what it should be, I think.
Yeah.
As much as I love Gail, I think we've seen enough of her, because a lot of what she does here there's nothing new or interesting with what Gail does.
Well, it is. I mean, in the similar way that you're talking about Sydney, it's like, why are you here?
Yeah, exactly. And all she does is keep repeating the same motif, right? Like, I promise I'm not going to write a book about this. I'm not going to report about this. And then she does. Like,
why are you so attached to these young women?
Yeah. Exactly.
But then it leads to a good punch in the face that I thought was really funny.
Yeah, that was really if you just brought her back for that 30 seconds and then she was gone the rest of the movie, I would have been
cameo.
Fine with it.
Yeah,
exactly. I think a cameo would have sufficed. All right, well, any final thoughts on Scream 6? I think we've covered quite a lot of ground here, but any final thoughts that you guys have?
Dermot Mulroney is good in this, and I think he's generally an asset to any film that he is in. They have to have a Dewey replacement. Spoiler alert for Scream 5, aka Scream. Mm-hmm. But they kind of do it with both Hayden Panettiere and Dermot Mulroney here. It's like we've got 2 Deweys. It takes 2 people to fill the void of Dewey. Mm-hmm. And I think they both do a pretty decent job. Again, Hayden Panettiere coming back is not exactly, whatever, pick a Legacy sequel, whatever. It's not Ivan Drago coming back, but it is. Yeah. She's in Creed 2, but she's serviceable. I think is kind of how I would describe her.
The character is serviceable here, and I love the character. She was one of my favorite things about Scream 4, as I said. But I think Hayden Panettiere is good here too. It's just like we said, the writing of the character here of Kirby feels like it is meant to fill some type of void, some legacy void.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that is unfortunate that you can kind of feel the strings being pulled in that regard.
That's the point.
Final thoughts. That's the point. That's the point.
That there's no better final thought than that. I do want to echo what Jay was saying though about Dermot Mulroney, because he's, especially given the tonal changes to this film, I did find that character interesting, because when we get to the ending sequence, and I'll be careful here to avoid spoilers, but what is revealed to us, I didn't find surprising, because when Mindy spilled the beans earlier in the film, I ate all of that up as this is how this film's going to go. I fully believed what she was saying there. So when it does come, I wasn't surprised, but there is something tonally so offbeat about this film comparatively to its predecessors, and the way Mulroney taps into that in his performance, I think, is very good. And unexpected for a movie like this, but the way it kind of grounds its drama, I think he does a great job of playing into that. Whereas other characters in the scene, I'll say vaguely, are a little bit more hammy, maybe should have been reeled in a little bit more. But Mulroney's very good, and the way that character is written and tethered to previous films makes sense given who he is. In terms of his occupation. So
sure.
I did like all of that and how it crystallizes here. So, and some of the new commentary on franchises, and just as a thriller, like as a slasher film, I think this film is effective. And I
also
very much enjoyed it.
Stay for the credits. I'll simply say that.
The end credits scene here, I'm telling you, it's going to change everything you think about the franchise. Truly.
Okay. So stay tuned to the end credits. And then my last final thought is, I think this is going to be one of those movies in this franchise that will only get better on repeat viewings. That was honestly my first thought coming out of the theater, was
very rewatchable.
Rewatchable. I liked it. And I think the more I sit on it, the more I think about what it's really doing. I think there's actually more to chew on than what an initial conversation will foster.
That's the exact opposite reaction I had with Scream 5, as we talked about, because when I saw Scream 5, and again, maybe that was the point, but with Scream 5, I thought...
I do not give 5 that much credit.
I don't think
kind of coming around to giving this one a little bit of credit in that regard. I do not give 5 that much credit. No,
because all 5, with 5, all it was, by the time that movie ended, I thought, this feels like it should have come out maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It feels so behind.
4 did that so much better. It
did. Yeah. Even the way it talks about trauma with relating to family and how that related to the killer reveal of Scream 4, it was more or less the same thematic device in Scream 5. It's kind of astounding that it really was more of a remake of Scream 4.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, 4 was weirdly prescriptive. Wes Craven knew something when he made that movie.
He and Kevin Williamson really... I thought with that one, they were certainly time traveling somewhere, and they did some research. Yeah.
At any rate, that's our thoughts on Scream 6 as it stands right now. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, please hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. Stay tuned for the main show this weekend. We are going to be talking about the Oscars, giving some sort of reactionary thoughts to the Oscars, which, Jay, you are watching now, right? You're watching. We're going to make you watch the Oscars. That's how this is going to work?
No, but I might come on the show anyway.
Okay. I love it.
I mean, JD's got control of the board. He can let you in or out as much as he wants.
That's true. But
well, here's the thing. It's how long are the Oscars? Like 4 hours? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's long.
It's crazy.
Long.
I'll see the highlights. I can comment on everything just from watching the highlights and reading the articles.
Exactly.
And it'll take 30 minutes instead of 3.5 or 4 hours.
There you go. I mean, and even just knowing who the winners are, you'll certainly have thoughts on that.
Yeah,
on its
yeah.
own terms.
Well, you got it. Well, let's do it now. This might be coming out after the Oscars. Go broke prediction. What you got?
I
mean,
my
Everything
big,
Everywhere All at Once, I think, is winning Best Picture.
Yeah, I agree with that. My no guts,
I
no
don't
glory
think you're
prediction.
going broke on that one.
Well, okay.
I'm predicting Colin Farrell for Best Actor. That's my
wow.
no guts, no glory.
Okay, so going broke.
I'm going
I don't know.
Carrie
I don't know.
Condon. I'm going another Banshees winner. Carrie Condon
I
gets
don't think it's
supporting
so broke
actress.
though. I feel like that category can go to anyone right now.
Yeah.
It is
I
a
know
little
a lot-
bit open, but I'd say
Yeah.
she's, from what I've read, she's not first on the list though.
All right, I'm saying
Yeah.
Babylon wins Best Picture by write-in.
Now that would be
That would
you'll
be
lose
awesome.
money on that bet. Yeah. At any rate, stay tuned for all of that. And we will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast.
Scream ranking 1, 2, 4, 6, 3, 5.
I'm almost
Sounds
there.
good.
Reverse 2 and 3 there for 4 and 2 for me, and then that's my ranking.